or presented a bit of a challenge for me. When I was asked to present at this session, I looked at the focus being public safety around climate change and issues to do specifically with BC Hydro, and maybe there would be a number of other presenters. So I have tried to focus very specifically on public safety related issues around utility problems. And when I got into that, I'm really not sure that there's much I'm going to tell you that you don't already know. I'd be surprised to find out that this actually presents anything to you that you didn't know before. But I think the questions that I've got kind of at the end, I hope will generate the discussion. So I'm not expecting this to be a half-an-hour presentation. And trust me, it wasn't due to a lack of effort. I've learned an awful lot about mitigation and adaptation. We certainly have people within our organization that are very much into the mitigation side on greenhouse gases, and BC Hydro is very much taking a leadership role in terms of addressing our requirements. But when you get into the very focused question around climate change, electric utilities, public safety impacts, we'll need to sort of go into this, and perhaps it's just a question of expanding on some of these things, but I'll be interested in seeing where that comes from for you. So am I just sort of using this to...
Yeah, I think it's just 2 points down.
So in terms of session goals, talk about the climate change hazard assessment for BC Hydro, the discussion on systems-related impacts, a number of which you will see demonstrated this afternoon if you go outside. Discussion on public safety vulnerabilities and outstanding questions. I guess there's nothing remote on this, eh?
Do you want me to, I can change slides for you?
No, it's okay. I can do that. Thank you. Just a quick picture in terms of what an overall hydroelectric system looks like. And this will provide you with a little bit of information as we go along and differentiate impacts based on, for example, transmission versus distribution. Up at the top, we have a hydro generation plant. The majority of our power in British Columbia is hydroelectric generation. And as a result of that, we've got about 42 dams on several river systems throughout the province. That's obviously transported through a transmission system, which we own, but we manage in the province of British Columbia. BCTC manages our assets on the transmission side. They also manage what we call our substations, whether they're transmission or distribution substations. BCTC has the responsibility of the management of those. And the big piece that we're responsible for, in addition to the generation, is the distribution, which is getting that out to the businesses and your homes and everything throughout the province of British Columbia. And BC Hydro has a responsibility for 95% of the power that's distributed in the province of British Columbia. A couple of other small companies in the interior Kelowna area. Fortis, for example, has that area of the market that they're responsible for. And we do an awful lot of work with Fortis. So that kind of gives you a picture, and if you keep that in mind as we sort of move through and talk about some of the impacts, some of them are very specific to aspects of the system. This is our current list. Any surprises there? Wind, rain, snow, ice, thunderstorms, drought. Those are the big pieces. Sorry? Oh, okay. For me, when I look at this, the difference for me when we talk about climate change, when we apply that lens, we're now talking about frequency and intensity. So how much more often are these types of events going to occur? Are they going to occur in the same time frame that we've been used to them? Will they occur earlier on? Will they occur more often? And are we likely to see an intensity in the type of events over the type of events that we've seen in the past? So for me, the list doesn't change an awful lot. There's one I would add to that now, or put in the category of rain, I guess, or precipitation relating to storm surge. We'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Where would you, or have you considered putting heat in there with regards to energy use?
Can we come back around to that in a couple minutes? Okay. Please be back up if we don't touch on it, but I think I've got it. So when we talk about electric system related impacts and we talk about wind, the majority of wind impacts are related to our distribution system. The transmission system is constructed in such a fashion that we don't normally see impacts of what we would consider normal wind events on our transmission systems. Having said that, when you start talking about the potential for an increase in the velocity of the winds, if that's something that we're looking at climate change, to what degree is that infrastructure currently constructed, and will we start seeing those impacts on the transmission system as well as the distribution system? Okay. Wind speed, direction, there's an impact change when we've got leaves on. If we see a storm that hits very early in the fall when the leaves haven't come off, that can be an issue for us. Periodically in the northern regions, we'll even see snow and wind combined events when leaves on, and those are particularly damaging to the infrastructure.
The leaves make it worse.
They do.
Why is that?
Because they hold, they form resistance, whether they collect snow or they cause resistance on the wind, and they're heavier when they hit our lines. So these wind events are obviously complicated by a number of the other factors that had before in the previous list, and we'll talk about those. Interestingly enough, this is from Alan Chapman, who is with our River Forecast Center. What we're seeing here is a 50% increase in storm rainfall frequency since 1955, and he's got two areas that he's surveyed, both Cowichan Valley and Estevan Point, and that's a fairly significant difference. Look at that. So I was listening this morning to somebody saying that there is a move afoot in London area to have groups come out and start debunking the science behind climate change. I think there are some scientists who are quite prepared to take that argument forward, and maybe it's a question of marketing differently, since they're clearly, I think that was your point, was they've picked up a new marketing strategy, maybe we need to improve ours. So clearly the information is there. This picture is of a tower in northern British Columbia, one of the transmission towers. And when we talk about extreme rain events, freshet type events, we have a couple of different things that we talk about. So at this time of year, we see heavier coastal rains that impact both the groundwater flooding potential, as well as when we get into the spring events, we will see a freshet mount. And depending on if that's combined with a heavy rain event, we can see events like this one, which was the 2007 flood threat, which was predicted to potentially have impacts across the province, but had most of their impacts in the northern. So this was one of our towers that doesn't normally, we don't build towers in the middle of rivers, just in case you're, so the river wasn't actually there before the tower. That was something that materialized during the event, and you can tell that it's a substantial amount of water that's taking on this tower, and at the bottom, that's probably not even what's left of the fence. That's probably debris that's collecting around the base of that tower, which is never a good thing for a tower. So when we talk about the rain events at this time of year, a couple of things that become really important to us is the level of increased inflows to our reservoirs. And while the reservoirs are built to a substantial capacity, when we have an event like the 2003 Pineapple Express that came through in October, we were talking in excess of 200-300 millimeters of rain in just over 24 hours, I believe, right? So we're not at that point talking about the capacity that any reservoir is necessarily. That's a change, almost a daily change at that point. And in order to protect the reservoir, there's a requirement for us to be able to spill and allow for that water to pass. And that water would be passing regardless of whether there was a reservoir and a dam there. That would then be naturally moving through that river course. So we have an ability to with that information incoming, we work with Environment Canada, with our own meteorologists, with our own hydrologists to make a determination on events like that, where we can start passing water and draining the reservoir in advance to be able to deal with those types of events. Clearly, that has an impact on our ability to generate power. So there are trade-offs involved, obviously, life safety versus economics. And when you get to a point where we know that there's a major storm like this one in 2003 incoming, it indicates for us that we have to start lowering our reservoir in order to be able to take that water as it comes in. That event got to the point where I think we were told we exchanged that reservoir twice in the period of time that weather system came through. It was such a massive amount of water that came through in that period. When we look at groundwater flooding, we have a couple of issues, and we were talking about this just before lunch or during lunch. Flooding for us causes two major areas of impact. One is where we have underground infrastructure. The potential water and electricity are always bad when they're mixed. especially if there's an individual or human involved in it. So there's always an issue of updating some of our underground structures where they exist close to rivers, new developments, those kinds of things being impacted by the outage or by the flooding. The other major concern relates to landslides, washouts impacting major infrastructure. And again, we go back to talking about distribution and the concern for the flooding on underground structures, and the second point being more related to a lot of our transmission type structures. We see the potential for that. Again, what was it? Probably February 2007. We had a combination of a snow on rain event up in the Prince Rupert area that caused damage to one of our towers and took up both transmission and distribution to the Rupert area for an extended period of about 10 days. We also have thermal generation up in that area. We're able to support the community while that was out. One of the other concerns is that it's all well and good to say that we've sustained damage in a particular area, but we really can't do anything until the flooding recedes. So as we had our discussions around the freshet in 2007, had that been realized in the Lower Mainland, we were talking about weeks of flooding in the Lower Mainland in highly densely populated areas. That means that there's nothing we can do until those areas are dried out. So you end up with outages, prolonged outages in areas, and then even once they're dried out, there's an extended period of time where electricians and provincial inspectors, municipal inspectors in some cases, have to be involved in inspecting private facilities before power can be restored to those areas. So impeding access to the site and then the long duration of the outage until whatever has caused the outage in the first place or caused us to shut the power off has then ceased. There is a major discussion afoot in Canada, certainly in the province of British Columbia. It's sort of taking a bit of an Olympic focus at this point in time, but it certainly has been on the books now since 2001, Peter, with regard to critical infrastructure and our discussions around critical infrastructure. And so anytime we start talking about effects of this nature, when you're looking at outages with BC Hydro, the knock-on effects to those kinds of outages relate to a lot of our dependencies on communications. And it's important that we recognize those, because if we have crews working in areas and we don't have access to communications, or from a public safety standpoint, as a result of a prolonged outage, they've lost communications in a given area. That means the public doesn't have access to those communication systems. Also, it impacts their ability to contact 911, all of those other issues. This was the major snow event that we saw, and it's funny, the folks from the east will look at this and say, major snow event? Isn't that like 10 centimeters of snow? It is. I think it was 10, 15 centimeters of snow. For us, that's a big deal. And it was heavy snow, and it was a rain on snow event that followed in the December storm, I believe. So we ended up with, and that's not unusual for us, we get a snowfall coming through, and municipalities work very hard to communicate with the public to get those catch basins cleared, because it's not just the melt of the snow, it's that incoming behind this is a rain event, and so you end up with flooding as a result of that as well. So this is one of our pole-mounted transformers, not having a good day, somebody's neighborhood, and we had dozens and dozens of those throughout the Lower Mainland that were involved. This is an older pole, but we even had some of the newer poles that were impacted by the weight of the snow in this event. Most of the impacts in terms of heavy snow relate to our distribution system. However, having said that, when you start getting up into the South Coast region, where we end up with a lot of deep and heavy snow, we end up with something called snow creep, where over a period of time you get the weight of that snow against the towers, compromising the actual structure of the tower itself. So that's always a threat to our systems in those areas, transmission related.